Alaska, the word subsistence has become a catch-all for a complex legal and political situation around who should have priority hunting and fishing, and when. Over the past several years, the debate has become increasingly divisive, exacerbating gaps in understanding between Alaskans of different cultures and different walks of life. In 1998, the Alaska Friends Conference, or Unprogrammed Quakers, began working together with the American Friends Service Committee to launch a compassionate listening project, Alaskans Listening to Alaskans About Subsistence. The project seeks to learn firsthand about fellow Alaskans' experiences, values, concerns, hopes, and fears, and to help Alaskans understand one another better, regardless of where the legal and political turmoil takes them.
I myself am happy only when I'm living on subsistence. I like to eat my fish every day. I like to eat my clams. We get different species of fish besides salmon.
Mm-hmm.
We get the red snapper and halibut and lingcod. We get Dungeness crab, king crab.
You know, we live in an economy where you need to sustain life through the money you make throughout the year. Our people didn't look at it that way. We sustained life by living on the land and the sea. We showed wealth by giving things away, not by how much money we can make. Today's economy isn't like that. And that's the sad part, because that's really where we need to steer as a people also, to survive.
This program is part of a series about Alaskans from different parts of the state, our lives, and what subsistence means to us as Alaskans. Federal law requires a rural priority for subsistence use of fish and game. The Federal Subsistence Board has determined that Fairbanks North Star Borough, Anchorage, Juneau, Valdez, and Ketchikan, as well as parts of the Matanuska-Susitna Valley and Kenai Peninsula, are urban. State law requires that all Alaskans, including those in urban areas, be eligible for a subsistence priority. Because of this difference, federal and state lands in Alaska are managed separately, and Alaskans in both cities and villages feel that their access to fish and game is in jeopardy. 45 air miles northwest of Ketchikan, on the southwest coast of Prince of Wales Island, is the village of Hydaburg. With about 380 residents, Hydaburg is the largest Haida community in Alaska. In the summer of 2002, a delegation of listeners with Alaskans listening to Alaskans about subsistence traveled to Hydaburg to learn about life here. Hydaburg was formed in 1911 when the Bureau of Indian Affairs relocated the residents of three villages, Saquon, Haukan, and Klinkwan.
Well, like I told you before, she told us about how much land that we had,
Yes.
you know, and from moving from Haukan over to Hydaburg, and how they came over for a better education and a better lifestyle. And all the time growing up, she always wondered, when were they ever going to get better? Till the day that she died just as poor as what she was raised. And in a way, I think that maybe when she is passing on, she realized how rich she still was, because she was very rich in culture.
The contrast between a nearly non-existent cash economy and the abundance of resources around Hydaburg is striking. Food from the land and sea is everywhere.
But people don't realize everyone's always so scared to eat things on the ocean and the beach, and no one should ever starve here and stuff. Right now, berries are getting ready. Seaweed, we were just able to harvest black seaweed, gumboots, abalone during the tide. Sea urchin, the sea urchin roe is really good.
Like the spring brings the steelhead. That's the first fish, fresh fish of the season. And then the tides are good, the weather's right for abalone. And well, actually the herring spawns in April, so the herring roe comes right after the steelhead, and right after the herring roe comes the seaweed.
Then on to fish. We can our fish, and then we dry some, salt some, and then the berries. All the berries is picked after that.
Mm-hmm.
And then the deer season opens to put deer meat up. Oh, we also get abalone too. You can see. So, well, there's lots that you can get and eat.
But like the whole subsistence, that was something that someone else gave us a name for. We didn't have a name for this is how we live. It just was. It was Creator and Earth and the spirit of the atmosphere and the undersea spirit and the people were all linked together, and it was cause and effect. You lived your life correctly or something bad would happen to you. A lot of the legends kept you in line. If you don't over-harvest anything, you never make fun or show any disrespect to your food or where you eat. And there was always some left for seed. In the way that we harvested things, there were times that we didn't harvest anything because we knew that it was seeding itself. There were times you didn't gather halibut because it was time for them to make other halibut. You didn't ever over harvest anything, and it's upsetting that you look at Fish and Game. They're coming here, and we're from the government, and we're here to help you, and we're going to manage your resources, and now there are no more resources close by to manage. They've wiped out the abalone, they've wiped out the fish, they've depleted all of the things that around us we knew how to take care of and make sure that they were here for the generation succeeding.
My sisters and I and my mother, we put up all our food together. And to me, that's, family is sharing. Because we all have our individual families to take care of.
Wow. The top has shrimp. This here has halibut. And that has all kinds of berries and king salmon and everything. This here box has king salmon steaks. This box here has all kinds of berries, huckleberries and blueberries. And some kind of berry. That's green beans out of the garden.
Wow.
It's out of the greenhouse.
I noticed you had a greenhouse.
Yeah. So that's my first freezer. And then this is the second freezer.
The creek in the middle of town is called Hecta Hanley. How do you say it? Hecta or Hecta Hanley, huh? Is that how you say water? Hanley? It means where we get our food. I learned that from Dalbert.
We are the caretakers of this land. We are the people with culturalistic values of knowing what we can use.
I'm not hungry now. Because I can go to my freezer and I can take out deer meat, I can take out any kind of fish that's in the sea, shrimp. I can take out just about anything. Provided, unless it's the season for it, then I'm probably pretty low on that. Sockeye season's coming up. There's just one right after the other that I think about all the time. Seaweed just passed, seagull eggs, the tides are big for abalone, they're big for clams and cockles, sea urchins are there. There's just such an abundance of food that I'll never go hungry unless they take that away from me. And they slowly are. And I say they, and I should say the state, the government. That's why it's a big issue to them. They want to know how they're going to control it. What's the fairest way?
At various times since the community was formed, Hydaburg has had a sawmill, fish canneries, and a commercial fishing fleet. Of these, there remain today only a handful of commercial fishing permits. Many residents of Hydaburg work temporary stevedoring jobs, loading timber onto barges, and some commute to the north end of the island for employment in the town of Craig. Subsistence harvests are essential here, and the line between subsistence and commercial uses of resources can be baffling and frustrating.
To me, it isn't about being fair. I live here. They don't. What's fair about them telling me what I can get and what I can't? It isn't. I don't tell them what to do in Juneau. I don't tell them what to do in Washington, D.C. They shouldn't be telling me. To me, that's what it really gets down to. They shouldn't be telling me.
Then we got a hold of a big king, and he was fighting it when he got it close enough, he turned it loose, and the Coast Guard boy that was on the boat, he said, asked us why we turned the big salmon loose like that. We're not allowed to take them.
So here's another factor that's why I spoke the other day about regulation. The regulatory authority should be laid within these native communities because they know what happens, you know, and how to, not only to protect the resource, but to use it, and that's what we're not having.
If you catch a king salmon, you have to let it go, and it usually will die.
Yeah.
Because you get a big one and start fighting with you, you're going to have to hit it anyway before you get your hook out of it. And what do you have? You're losing something. There's our resources.
I don't like the fact that I need a permit to go get my fish, that I need a sport fishing license to go out and fish. That was created because other people that want to come here and do it, and they could be making money off it by sport fishing. And, you know, they call it sport fishing. To me, it's not a sport. My freezer's in full because I like to fish. My freezer's full because that's what I like to eat.
According to the law, federal Anilka law, we have customary and traditional hunting fishing rights.
Well, as far as people getting by, I try to stimulate the economy by buying fish if I can, because I can afford to buy hamburger. So I bought a fish from somebody last week because I can pay for it, and they have absolutely no income. So I bought things from people for a few years, just trying to get them into the idea you can have a store here, open it up and sell seafood. But the state is restricting us. So those actions are not allowed. You know what happens to people when they're not allowed to have those hopes?
We eat halibut, we eat lingcod, we eat red snapper, we eat rockcod. There isn't any fish out there that we don't eat.
Restricted. I recall in a meeting in Petersburg where Vic Burgess went to this one. The deal on halibut came up, and they finally come up with a plan. This has been modified since that time. You can go out and get one halibut. You have to put out one line out there, and you have to anchor over it. In other words, anybody has ever gone out in the winter and tried to anchor over a halibut line, you know, and bouncing it rougher than dickens there, you know, yet that's foolish. Most of us just set out trout lines, portions of a skate, or what they call Indian hooks. And eventually, you know, the halibut are not as numerous in the winter. Many of them go out in the ocean in very deep water to spawn. But you'll have a certain amount of winter halibut. It's very important to the people here, and Craig, and Tlawak, everywhere else. And it's a matter of, they put very severe restrictions, so after you screamed a lot about it, and then you modified their regulations and say you can take two. But this thing about staying out over the hook, and you know, the commercial fishermen don't do that. They run a halibut skate and leave it for several hours or a day or whatever, then pull it. The federal government manage halibut resources. They put quotas on it, mostly for commercial fishing. And the sportsmen, they want a bigger and bigger slice of the pie, and they're getting it too, I guess, everything I could see. But at that point, you start to scream, "Hey, what about us? What about our needs?" Because we were the first users on it.
The fishing industry used to be part of the lifeline of the community, and the prices got so bad when I quit fishing like Pat. You know, when they're paying 5 cents a pound for pink salmon, and I'm going to school in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and I see it on the shelf for $7.35 a pound, and we're only getting 5 cents a pound at the site. You know, something's definitely wrong.
I understand marketing. I understand it's criminal what the state does. They take a humpy pink salmon and they buy it for 3 cents a pound, and they can it and put it in a can and mush, and they can't even give it away. Pink salmon. Have you ever bought pink salmon in a grocery store? No, you haven't. You bought tuna, but you've never bought pink salmon. Let's talk about marketing. I can take that pink salmon and make $25 when the white people can come in and have to give it away. Give it for subsidies, give it to foreign aid, give it to food banks. They can't even sell it. What do you call that? That's like scraping up everything and dumping it into a big old pit and giving it away. To me, that's not quality, that's not marketing. That's bad management.
It's the 1700s the Haida start moving over because of the epidemics that were hitting all the Indian lands from down south. And so then the people start migrating over here to these islands. By 1905, they were here and they were living in tents. They moved them, they left longhouses that were being burnt down and everything. They left everything in them. So then in 1938 they created these fishing camps where that the people were going to go fishing, and they told us that we had what was called a reserve status, a reservation status. And then in 1957 the state came in and told us we weren't allowed to be a reservation. So from 2 million acres we got down to 1957 to 112,000 acres, and then came ANSCA. They gave us a corporation which I never believed in, and that was, they gave us 24,000, so you could see the breakdown of the lands that belonged to the Haidas that were a strong fishing village. And I feel like as caretakers of our land that we should still own all this land. You know, when the state talks about subsistence, that the only thing that's included in that subsistence is the food that we digest. But to me, if they're going to talk about subsistence, it should mean air, seawater, and land.
I kind of followed this thing all the way through. I watched as an 8-year-old boy, I guess, when they first passed the Lincoln Haida Act. You know, it was, in a nutshell, basically, there was a taking of land. Just about the entire area was put into the National Forest back in 1902, 1909, 1907.
Oh,
so
way before land claim.
Yeah, they established the National Forest. So that constituted a taking, which means that you're entitled to sue. 30 years later, you find out you have no standing, that the courts have held that you weren't a tribe at all. You're a loose confederation of clans, and said had no standing in court. So they had to pass a law to make you a tribe, oddly enough. That's really odd when you think about it. But after 30 years after that, in court, you get $7 million, 35 cents an acre. Yeah, you know, at that point, you know, my indication at the time was just tell them to take the money and shove it. That was the way I felt.
They say they have to keep logging so that they don't keep going further back in the hole. They have to have a restart of going back into the woods and logging. They say they can't afford to shut down, and they can't afford not to make their payments, and then they can't afford to find anyone to better negotiate a wage for their timber. It just goes around and around.
The only reason they are continuing to log is because they need that cash flow. Whether or not it's going to bankrupt the corporation, it's something they have to do. Haida Corporation is not logging at the time, but we're still in dire straits because if we don't do something, the people need something. And right now, Haida Corporation provides a monthly dividend from timber revenues or whatever other means that they can get that cash from. Whether they sold timber, whether they sold raw logs and exported them. Hyda Corporation being an ANSCA corporation, it has nothing else but timber to build a base with.
The timber resources really get gobbled up and put into one source up there. So the towns left with no resources, and they start to migrate out of here to get jobs. And then they kind of criticize you years later. Hey, how come half the people left the town?
Well, right now it looks kind of bleak because this was a community that was just all fishing. And right now, with everybody that had any kind of license sold them off with the longshoring that came in and the logging and made our people into longshoring and loggers. And now that we're getting to the end of the logging part, I kind of don't know what's going to happen to our community.
It's a sad story, but somebody has to hear it. You know, it's not fun. Especially sitting here having to worry about what you're going to do for a living. You know, there's no income in this community, so we have a big problem of dysfunction. Very big problem of dysfunction.
You talk about the future of Hydaburg. I was fortunate. I thought I was being punished somehow by being raised by my grandparents and having to harvest, having to be busy all the time. And I was fortunate. I was around all of these old nannies, grandmothers, for years growing up, and now I realize how fortunate I am. I learned how to put up fish. I've learned how to live off the land and the sea. But I have a hard time because they were so strong, and they were matriarchs, and they were the leaders of this community, them and the grandfathers, the Chinas, and we lost so many of them in such a quick succession, and we all thought we had time, and then now they're all gone. And I don't see anybody else being able to fill their shoes, and that's terrifying.
We asked people in Hydaburg, what do you hope for the future?
My ancestors wanted something better for me before I was even an idea or a thought. I want my ancestors to think that I tried to make a difference, and you wonder what it's all for and what it's all about. And when you talk about the future of Hydaburg, I work a lot with youth, and if you can just make them realize that it's now their turn to take care of things, hopefully, you know, that's our hope. That's the future of Hydaburg, and it may not be my children. It may be their children or their children. And hopefully there's something left, and that things haven't been completely decimated by all of the government agencies coming in and thinking that they can take care of our resources. Describe it culturally, we can protect it. That allows me to do language, song and dance, gathering, just a lot of really neat things.
This lady was crying. All the sea otter hunters, the sailing ships would come to pick up the hiders at Cape Mazon, the big village out at the point here. And this old man came to his wife and says, well, honey, he says, I don't think I'm going to make it back on this trip. They're picking them up to go to Bering Seas to hunt sea otter. And sure enough, they took him on. And that summer, he never made it back. But he told his wife, I says, honey, if I don't come back, you'll recognize me with a school of killer whales coming in front of the village here, and you'll recognize me. I'll be different. I'll have double fin killer whale. That'll be me. So you know who I am. Sure enough, when that fall, the sea otter hunters came home, but he never made it. He drowned it up north. And that spring, the whole school of killer whales came in front of the village, you know, and his wife was among them spectators on the beach. She was crying, and one lady asked her, what's the matter, dear? She said, that's my husband out there with double fin killer whale. That's the story behind that double fin killer whale.
one of the problems we have is people who construct the dictionaries have a tendency to make literal translations, whereas he makes conceptual translations. I asked my uncle one time why those things all had the same name. How were they the same? A ladder, a doorway, a clam, a road or trail? And he said, Q, he said, that doorway will always lead you to a certain point. Q, that ladder will always lead you to a certain point. Q, that trail or road will always lead you to a certain point. And then I asked him, well, what about the clam? He says, when that clam squirts water up, will always lead you to a certain point. So
Of course.
that's how those things are the same. And then I asked him about why does a sinker on a fishing line and a pillow have the same name? And he looked at me like I was defective. He says, can't you figure it out? And I said, no. He said, when you put that sinker on that line and you put it in the water, he said it takes it down into another reality, into another world. When you put your head on that pillow, it takes you down into another reality, another world.
That's it.
Who's done Kinsa? I'll see you again.